Today we're going to write and graph equations of parabolas, but we're also going to make sure we go through all the details for parabolas that open left and right. So we have the two standard forms here, and they kind of line up, like this right here. So a vertical axis of symmetry. So if the parabola opens up or down, that's where the y is on the left and the x is squared. If it's the other way, if it opens right or left, then it's x on the left and y is squared. So this is kind of the new one we haven't really done too much with, and the one we're going to really focus on with these notes. The first problem is probably the most detailed because it's telling you to graph it. So when you graph anything, you obviously have to have the vertex, and you have to have 2 points, one to the right and to the left, in this case above and below. And so we have to find these points because it's not going to be something we can just put into the calculator because you won't have the calculator to use. It's going to take up kind of a lot of space. So we can tell by looking at this that since it's x not squared, y squared, this is going to go left or right. And since d is positive, so we know it's y squared, so now that means it goes left or right. D is positive, which means it opens to the right. So we know the direction just from looking at the equation. We can find the vertex pretty easily. The vertex is the opposite of the x, then the opposite of the y. I would suggest using the graph to help kind of orient us and also to count the squares and find all the different things that we need kind of easier that way. So we know that 1 over 8 is equal to 1 over 4d. So that means d is 2. So 2 spaces to the right or inside, because we know the parabola opens to the right. So if we go 2 spaces to the right, that is the focus. I'm going to label these so we can keep track of what they are. So the focus is at the point positive 1, negative 3. The directrix, which is going to be on the outside of the graph, is 2 spaces the other way from the vertex. And that obviously is a line. So here's your directrix. And that is the line that touches the x-axis. So the directrix is at x equals negative 3. Now the axis of symmetry, that line obviously goes this way. That's going to touch the y-axis, and you can see that that's the line y equals negative 3. So the parts are really pretty quick to find. It's the points that we need to draw the graph that are a little bit more difficult. We are going to use, I'm going to come way over here on the right, we're going to use the x value of the focus. This is generally the best number to select. It's a little bit more, if you have a strategy, it's going to be a little bit easier than if you just start picking random points because you're not always sure exactly what points are on the parabola. So I'm going to use the x value of the focus. So we know that x equals 1. You go back to the original equation, which I of course can't see, and you plug 1 into that original equation. So we're going to plug a 1 in there for x. Remember, it's x equals 1, so 1 goes in there for x. So x plus 1. So x plus 1, so 1 plus 1 is equal to 1/8, and then we just have y, of course I can't remember now, y plus 3 quantity squared. So 2 is equal to 1/2 times y plus 3 quantity squared. Oh, I forgot my d. It's 1 over d. It's 1/8. Sorry about that. I don't know where I got the 1/2 from. So this is 1/8. My fault. I would multiply both sides by 8 first to get rid of that 1/8. So this is 16 is equal to y plus 3 quantity squared. Now take the square root. Now because it's an equation, we get plus or minus 4 is equal to y plus 3. So plus or minus 4, and when we go to subtract the 3 from both sides, put the 3 in front of the plus or minus signs. These will be our values for y. Now remember, our x values were 1. We started with x equals 1, so x equals 1 in both cases. Negative 3 plus 4 is 1, and negative 3 minus 4 is negative 7. These points will be on the parabola, And that's really the best way to get them. So we have the point 1, 1, and 1, negative 7. Please draw in the parabola. And the only reason we're doing this is because it says to graph. If the directions didn't say graph, we wouldn't need to find all those points. Now, just to remind you on completing the square, right, you take half of this b value, so that gives you negative 1, and you square that and add that to both sides. So we're going to add 1 to both sides. So then we would end up with the binomial of letter, first sign, the number we squared. And of course on the other side it would equal 7. That's the kind of the way we're going to use this now. The directions have changed, and now we don't want to graph it, so we don't really need quite the details. All we need are the parts. The graph paper is there, again, to help you sort of orient yourself if you have to count the squares in order to find the focus or the directrix. We're not really drawing the graph, but the grid is there to help kind of figure out the spacing. So remember, with a parabola, we can put either side, doesn't really matter which side is squared, it matters what letter is squared. And since the x is already on the left, I like to keep my x squared positive. That's the most important value, is whatever letter is squared. So I'm going to keep that on the left and just complete the square the way it's written. So x squared minus 2x, complete the square. And then on this side, we already have negative 8y minus 9. So half of 2 is 1. We're going to add 1 to both sides. So now we're left with x minus 1 quantity squared is equal to negative 8y minus 8. Now we have to kind of force that fraction to happen, that 1 over 4d. It's not really something that occurs easily, just sort of with the problem itself. So on the right hand side we can factor out a negative 8 and leaves you with y plus 1. We want the fraction in front of the quantity squared. So if we divide both sides by negative 8, we can write that negative 1 over 8 times x minus 1 quantity squared is equal to y plus 1. Oops, I guess we don't really need the parentheses there. Now you should be able to find the parts. We know that it's negative and it's x squared, so this means it opens down. And we know that the value for d is negative 2. The vertex, opposite of x, is 1. Opposite of y is negative 1. So 1, negative 1. There's our vertex. And again, the graph paper is just there to sort of help us count the squares. Since it goes down, that means it goes this way. Rough sketch. So the focus is going to be in the inside of the parabola. So the focus coordinates are at 1, negative 3. The directrix is going to be 2. Outside the vertex are 2 up. So there's our directrix right here. And that's got the line y equals 1. And then the axis of symmetry goes the other way, perpendicular, connects all 3. So that touches the x-axis, and that's the equation x equals 1. So again, the graph just there to help. For number 3. Again, the y is squared. It's on the left. So I'm going to leave it on the left. I don't see why not. So we have y squared plus 2y. We're going to have to complete the square. Now all the x's in the plain numbers have to go to the other side. So on the right hand side we're going to have 6x. We also have to move, right, that becomes positive, we have to move this 13, minus 13, and we're going to add the same number to both sides. Half of 2 is 1, and 1 squared is 1, so we're going to add 1 to both sides. Once we write the binomial, the letter, the first sign, the number squared. On the right hand side we get 6x minus 12. So now we have to factor that right hand side, because we're trying to find something to divide by. 6 is what they have in common. And now we can divide both sides by 6. So I'm going to write this as, again, 1 over 6 times y plus 1 quantity squared is equal to x minus 2. Now it's backwards. So for the vertex, when we go to read this, you have to read it XY. This is your X. It's labeled. Make sure you pay attention. Don't just go left to right. So this is 2, -1. Obviously, if the vertex is wrong or backwards, the rest of it is going to be kind of difficult. Since it's y squared and it's positive, we know that this thing opens to the right. Y squared is left or right. D is positive, so we know it's to the right. So we know that 6 is equal to 4D. So we get 3/2 is equal to D. I don't know why I wrote it like that. Sorry, I wrote it backwards. You want to call that 1.5? That might actually be easier to sort of deal with. So we'll call it 1.5. So 2, -1 is our vertex. I like to label it so I remember what's going on. The focus, since it opens this way, the focus will be 1.5 to the right. So that's where the focus is. So the focus location is at 3.5 or 3.5 down 1. The directrix will be 1.5 on the other side. So this is your directrix right here. And the directrix, you can see, touches the x-axis. So it's x equals 1/2. Axis of symmetry goes the other way, perpendicular. That touches the y-axis, so that's the line y equals -1. And again, this is your answer along with your equation. The graph is not something that's graded unless you're specifically asked to draw the graph. Good news is these last three are not nearly as complicated. Now we're going to go backwards. I was just making sure it was recording. So if we put this on the graph, because we don't know what's happening, left, right, up, down, and we need to understand what's happening before that. So we're just going to use the grid to help us figure out what's going on. So 1, 2, that's your focus. Vertex is at 3, 2. So there's the vertex. So this thing goes to the left. So right away, left tells you y squared and that d is negative. Well, we know the value for d. It's right here. It's the space between the focus and the vertex. So now we know that the d is -2. So we can just write the equation. X minus, remember we're going to use HK, 3, 2. X minus the x value is equal to -1/8, because, right, this is 1/4D, so that's going to give you -1/8, and then y minus 2 quantity squared. This is the equation. Sorry, I wrote it in the graph there. That's it. That's all I want. It's the equation. So the graph is just there to help figure it out. For the next one, we have the focus at the point 3, 0, and the vertex at the point 3, 2. So this thing goes down. So down tells you x squared. It also tells you d is negative. And so now we know d is -2, because we just count, again, the spaces between the vertex and the focus. So since it's x squared, we use this one. Y minus the y value, make sure you're looking at the vertex, equals -1/8, and then we'd have x minus 3 quantity squared. Now for the last one, the focus is at 2, 2. The vertex is at 2, 1. That's your vertex. So this thing goes up. It goes up, so that tells you x squared. And the space between these 2 points gives you the fact that d is 1. So up and down is your regular old y equals x squared, just like the one we just had. So we have y minus the y value of the vertex. Again, pay attention to that. And this is going to equal 1/4 times x minus 2 quantity squared. The assignment's down here at the bottom. On page 356, do 7 through 13 all.